Okay, so we're talking about 2003 right now. So I want to get kind of a reference point. Because before you started betting on NBA games, you started betting at country clubs, card games, and other sports games. So when did the actual gambling start with you?
I think it started right when I started to join country clubs after I got hired by the NBA, playing in golf matches and playing in card games in the locker room afterwards, and then getting in the car and running down to Atlantic City, which was only about an hour and 15 minutes away from where we lived. I think that's where it all kind of started to snowball for me.
I mean, did you feel you had a gambling problem early on?
Not early on. I think eventually it got to that point where I was just consumed with betting on everything, whether it was golf, cards, football, baseball, anything really, just, place a bet and watch it on TV.
Okay, and it was that year in 2003 that you actually started betting on NBA games.
Yes, right around that time, I think.
When it comes to betting on sports games, it's not about necessarily who wins or loses. It's about the spread.
Right.
Right? So explain to everyone what the spread is.
Well, the spread's a number that the Vegas odds makers puts on a game to determine who they feel would win by a certain amount of points. So if the Sixers were playing Boston and they felt that Philly was the better team, they would take 10 points off of their total score and give it to Boston. And you would have to pick between those two teams who you think would win the game based on that spread being involved.
I mean, based on what you know about the game, how accurate is the spread most of the times?
Very accurate. It's amazing how,
okay.
In any sport, the odds makers in Vegas are very good at putting a number on a game that is very accurate.
Okay, so tell me about the first bet that you placed on an NBA game.
The first time I placed a bet on an NBA game was I was at home and I was looking at the Philadelphia Daily News, and every day I would look at the lines and the spreads, and I also looked at the referee's master schedule of who was officiating games that day. And then I went over to the country club to play golf, and my buddy asked me to give him a couple plays in the NBA that night, and I rattled off 3 games to him, and they all won. And the next day he called me up and asked me if it was that easy. And I said it was, based on who was officiating the games.
So based on the general public, is 70 to 80%, is that just an obscenely high number in terms of winning?
Incredibly high. If you can win 57 to 58% of the time, that's considered good in the gambling world. So when we were winning at 70 to 80% of the time, that was an insane amount of percentage to pick games.
Okay. Because most of the games that you bet on were games that you were a referee in, right?
Not in the beginning, they weren't, but it eventually spilled into that when I would be in the lunchroom or locker room or pregame meeting and know that certain things were going to be done in that game that night and certain teams were going to be put at an advantage or a disadvantage. I would spill that information over to the people that I was gambling with and started to bet on games that I officiated.
Okay, because when people hear your story, they assume that you being the ref, you're going to be officiating in a way that's going to help you win a bet. But based on the FBI going through all the records, as well as an NBA internal investigation, they both confirmed that you never actually made bad calls in order to help you win bets.
No, I didn't do that. But what I did do was I knew what the league wanted the officials to call that night, and it would put a team or a player at an advantage or a disadvantage. And then I would look at the line and see with that advantage, disadvantage, that line was 3, 4, or 5 points off. And that's how I was able to pick the game so well.
I mean, it's the equivalent of like insider trading.
To a certain degree,
market, right?
I was always making correct calls, but I knew what correct calls to make. Pretty much that we're going to put it. The crew was making that we're going to put a team at advantage or a disadvantage.